Ever feel like the resources and advice out there for women are missing something essential? I thought so too, which is why more than 6 years ago, I created She Said, She Said. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and after 3 decades in communications and then advocacy, and now juggling motherhood and entrepreneurship, trust me, friend, I get it. Making a real impact takes more than just passion. It takes the right mindset, the right skills, the right investments, and the right community. On this show, we dive deep with incredible women from all walks of life who have been there. We uncover the secrets to building influence, navigating tricky relationships, and staying true to ourselves even when it's tough. And let's face it, it often is. I also throw in my own favorite productivity and life hacks, things that have shifted my perspective and might help you too. Wherever you are in your journey, my goal here is to leave you inspired to define success your way and to help you build the confidence you need to tackle your biggest goals. Subscribe today and let's unlock your full potential, your confidence, and your greatest influence. Hey friend, welcome to She Said, She Said podcast. I'm your host, Laura Cox Kaplan, and I'm really excited to welcome you today. I am especially excited because today's episode is truly something special. We are kicking off the month of May with a special Mother's Day conversation that is also part of our ongoing collaboration series with the Southern Sea. Now, if the Southern Sea is new to you, it is a really fantastic network of creative entrepreneurs, and it's an organization that has truly enriched my life. If this concept sounds like something that you might be interested in, be sure to check out the link that I've provided in the show notes where you can learn a bit more, or you can always message me on social media for more information. You'll find me at Laura Cox Kaplan. But today, we are exploring that magical intersection where motherhood meets, and I would argue in many ways informs entrepreneurship. You know, some of the most powerful business stories don't actually start in boardrooms or in corner offices. They begin right at home and are fueled by deep family values and an unwavering commitment to actually be present as a parent. That's exactly the story that we're honoring today, though interestingly, we're hearing it through a son who's now carrying forward the extraordinary legacy of his mom. My guest is Brian Hart Hoffman, who, alongside his twin brother Eric, now leads Hoffman Media. Hoffman Media is a remarkable publishing success story that is defying all odds in today's challenging media landscape. Hoffman Media has transformed from a single cross-stitch magazine in 1983, I kid you not, into a diversified media powerhouse with multiple revenue streams. Now, Brian and Eric's mom, Phyllis Hoffman DiPiano, started the company in the basement of their Birmingham home while the two twins were just toddlers. Phyllis built the empire by focusing on what her women readers, her friends, and her neighbors actually wanted. And she created such a powerful connection with audiences that advertisers literally couldn't ignore it. Brian hasn't just preserved his mother's vision, he's actually expanded it beautifully through his own passion project. That brand has grown into magazines, cookbooks, a podcast, e-learning classes, and even international baking retreats. In fact, Brian joined me for this podcast conversation from a baking retreat he was leading in Capri. This conversation is such a testament to how maternal influence can spark entirely new creative directions. Now, in this conversation, Brian and I talk about the power of niching down and why that matters, the courage to redefine success when necessary, and how leaning fully into your passions can fuel both your business dreams as well as your life satisfaction. We'll also hear about why Phyllis decided to keep the company rooted in Birmingham rather than relocate, a decision that frankly put family first, even when it meant taking a bigger financial risk. Now, I didn't get to know Phyllis personally, regrettably, but hearing her story through Brian has been so incredibly inspiring. And I know you're going to feel the same way. I am, of course, especially curious to hear which parts of this conversation resonate most with you. So be sure to let me know that as well. For now, though, here is episode 329, my conversation with Hoffman Media President and Chief Creative Officer and the inspiration behind Bake from Scratch, Brian Hart Hoffman. Enjoy. Brian, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. And I think to be the first male guest on the podcast. Second. Okay, well, in the beginning.
You're right behind Mother Teresa's lawyer, which I think is like really high praise. You may not be the first one, but I think being the second and being behind Mother Teresa's lawyer is not a bad thing.
That's an honor I will happily take.
I am really, really thrilled to have you. You have a fascinating story, but one of the main focuses that we really want to talk about today is your incredible mom, Phyllis Hoffman DiPiano. She inspired so many people. She created this amazing publishing dynasty, essentially, that you and your
Yeah.
brother now run. So I'd love for us to start there. Let's talk a little bit about your mom and this incredible story. Her journey to entrepreneurship was not the typical one.
Not at all. And I think even still when I talk about her now after she's passed away in such a abstract way, I think about this person like, how could this type of a human existed on this earth? And how lucky was I that she was my mom? But my mom grew up in a family in suburban Birmingham, Alabama. Her dad was a career, manager at the telephone company, worked at the same place for his whole career. My grandmother was a stay at home mom. And my mom was the oldest of three kids, kind of, the oldest child role of like keeping everyone in order. And she was a very business minded person, I guess, even from a young age, and kind of the regimen she put herself through in her life. And then she was as creative as the day is long. And my grandmother taught her how to sew. She played the piano. She became the church pianist at 12 years old.
Wow.
You look at this journey of this person and still not quite knowing where those lines of things were going to intersect. But fast forward to her becoming a CPA, back in the 70s when women weren't really making advancement into, public accounting firms and things like that. And she was hired by Ernst and Winnie, which is now the modern day Ernst and Young, or I
Right.
guess I should say EY, because I
Right.
think they
Exactly.
branded themselves as EY. But she worked there until she married my dad. And my dad was living in a town like an hour and a half north of Birmingham, but she left the job and married him and moved to, middle North Alabama. And she had a next door neighbor that became her best friend, Barbara Cockerham. And my mom went on her honeymoon to with my dad, and while she was in Colonial Williamsburg, she bought a counted cross stitch kit. She didn't know how to cross stitch, but she wanted it and she wanted to learn. So she came home and her next door neighbor, Barbara Cockerham, taught her how to cross stitch. And that learning and then her really falling in love with it led to her realization that, hey, there's not a magazine in the world that suits the type of cross stitch that we're doing, and there's not anything for people that get beyond the ABC 1, 2, 3. And so in 1983, with three other women and $500 each, they started Just Cross Stitch magazine.
Amazing.
And she didn't know what she was doing. She had no career experience in the publishing world, in the needlework industry, but she knew accounting, she knew numbers, and she knew that they had to equal profit in order for things to succeed. And she partnered with all these needlework stores and she said, okay, I don't have any money or anything, but if I put a listing in the magazine for you, would you put a subscription card on the counter in your shop? and let's see if we can just mutually benefit and launch a magazine for cross stitch in the industry. And so that's what she did. They printed the first issue. She went to the post office every day to collect the mail and see how many people had chosen to subscribe. And she noticed it trickled down to a day that she went in and her heart sank and there weren't any cards in the mail. And she said to the postman came out from behind the counter and said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I'm okay." She said, "I'm just used to seeing mail here and I'm trying to start a business." And he said, "Oh, there's no mail in there today because there's a bag full in the back."
Oh,
And they
wow.
couldn't fit it all in her mail collection. So she took the big bag of subscription cards back to the office where they were manually keying everything into the systems and thus started a successful magazine that became the largest magazine in the needlework industry.
That's amazing,
And
and she was the mother at the time, so you have a twin brother, Eric,
yes,
and
yes,
you 2, I believe, were toddlers around this time, is that correct?
we were 2 years old when she started when she started the magazine.
That's amazing. That's really
She
amazing.
knew that she didn't want to go back into public accounting. My dad had taken a job in Birmingham, so they actually moved back to Birmingham where mom was from, and she could have easily gone back into the corporate world, but she wanted to be a mom first. Her dream in life was to be a mom, and she said that no matter what she did, she had to be mom first, and then everything else had to happen in line after that. So she started this company, and we were 2 years old. They started the company in the basement of our home. There was, I'll never forget, like a custom built out office with desk for people. And I'm sure my brother and I were just running everywhere thinking it was fun to have this playhouse of people coming every day and working and doing photo shoots in the basement.
And that was normal to you as a kid, right?
That was normal. I didn't realize I was ever learning anything about publishing, but I grew up in it. So I guess I was learning through osmosis anyway.
I mean, she really put an anchor, in the ground for the publishing empire that ultimately you and your brother now run, that really
Yeah.
has changed the face of Birmingham in particular at a time when magazine publishing nationally is in a very difficult place. That is not the story at Hoffman Media.
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about, there are a lot of dimensions to her story, and you kind of alluded to them, that she her decision-making process was very much focused on continuously learning, on investing in you and your brother. And at one
Yeah.
point, she had an opportunity, I think, to move the company somewhere else, potentially to make more profit, but she decided to stay put. And maybe talk a little bit about the decision making and how that really shaped the business and where you guys have gone.
The journey for her, like you said, was mom first. And as the company grew, she realized that she knew what she knew, but she also relied upon a lot of the publishing counterparts in Birmingham, a very friendly city. We've learned through the history of what my mom shared with us that, executives at Southern Progress were telling her things that she should be doing. I mean, it was just such a community of supporting. It wasn't like cutthroat competition, and she learned a lot through just the local publishing connections in Birmingham. But in 1993, the company had grown to a point that mom knew there was a potential for it to grow even further. So she and Barbara were the two remaining owners at the time, and they sold the company. They
Right.
sold to a larger craft publisher that gave my mom the opportunity in an executive role to launch magazines like McCall's Quilting and all of these brands that you now know today. My mom was a part of them, even though they're not Hoffman Media magazines. But my through that relationship at the time of our company being owned by another company, my mom's impact affected their craft publishing and magazines as well. But in 1998, they wanted to relocate the Birmingham operation to a Colorado office where they were also doing craft work. So they said, "We're going to move the Birmingham company there." And my mom said, "My boys are going to be seniors in high school the next year. I can't do that to them. I cannot take my children away from their friends, their school, and everything. And for their senior year of high school, be new kids on the block. And she said that's when motherhood kicked in first and not career advancement. And she asked them, she said, I'm at a really tough spot here. She said, can I buy my magazines back that I sold to you and separate from the company and then reincorporate again in Birmingham and stay there? And they allowed her to do that.
That's a
So my dad and my mom mortgaged the house again and took out enough money to repurchase her magazines. And then in 1998, we were reincorporated then as Hoffman Media. So the name of the company that you now know today.
yeah. I mean, that is such an incredible story. And I I wonder, clearly she was driven by her, strong driving values as a mom, but how did she had to have a lot of doubt. There had to be a lot of, sort of a tendency to second guess. I mean, most of us have a tendency to really second guess ourselves. Maybe talk a little bit about kind of how she plowed through that.
You know, I I remember, like, as a child, I remember key memories of things that now I look back and I put pieces together and understand what sacrifice means. I remember her telling my brother and I one year, she said, "So Christmas is gonna be smaller this year. Just want you boys to be, thinking that when you wake up on Christmas Day, we've got things for you, but we're just not in a place right now that I can do everything I would." She was always one to spoil, and gift giving was her love language. And it really burdened her that she had to tell us we were gonna notice some things were different. And when I look back at that, I've since learned she went 5 years without a salary so that she could pay the employees that were faithful to her company and believed in her, even at a time when she could have easily sold again, gone out of business, and things were constantly on that rocky path. And I remember her taking on a second job as an organist in another church so that she could make enough money to pay for my brother's tuition at the University of Alabama.
Wow.
So from that year, 1998, when we were getting ready to begin our senior year of high school, the next years or so were the life support years for the company. And she was investing in the company constantly, but also remaining mom and making enough money to not ask my brother to take out a student loan or anything. She wanted to pay for his education. And again, when I look back at that, I didn't realize then the heaviness that she must have been feeling every single day. Is there enough money coming in the door? Can I make payroll? And then not even taking a dime for herself and just relying on my dad's income to support the family through that time.
What do you think helped her persevere with this particular focus on publishing? Because she did have other options. Like in your mom's case, unlike a lot of women, especially during that time
Yeah.
period, she had a CPA. Like she could have done something else and made more money. So what was it about this focus on the family business and on publishing that really kept her going?
I think it was where she found her passion.
Mm.
I think the minute that light, she was creative and had many passions, but I think this was where she saw her dreams coming into a tangible product that people loved and adored. And she poured her passion for afternoon tea into a brand called TeaTime. She poured her passion for the Southern lifestyle and elegance into Southern Lady. She poured her passion. I mean, you just think about all of these things that every time she found a new avenue in this niche marketing world of publishing, she was pouring herself into it.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of, I think all of us as entrepreneurs, when you love what you're doing so much, you're willing to sacrifice a lot to stay in that because of what it brings back to you. And I think that was it for her because you're right. She could have gone into the corporate world. She could have had probably been hired at other publishing companies to run their creative divisions and things like that in order to secure for herself income.
Mhm.
But I think for her to remain the mom, the employer, having her colleagues and people who had worked with her for decades, that was their loyalty to her and her loyalty to them was part of that daily drive to continue doing whatever it took to succeed. and taking risk. I mean, I think she, obviously coming from a business background, she understood what risk and reward was, where a lot of us would bail at some point. 5 years is a long time to go. And I will just say, my brother and I have never had to go through that sort of sacrifice. And to her, I'll forever be grateful for that. But she did it. And I think it was her passion driving her every day through the worst years of it.
It's so fascinating. There's so many dimensions to her story and to her legacy that I've just been so fascinated by the more that I learned about her. And I've, of course, gotten to know you through the
Yeah.
Southern Sea. And I should say, of course, this interview is part of our She Said podcast, the Southern Sea collaboration series. And we are so excited to have you here. The Southern Sea has created a scholarship in your mother's name. And so for the past 2 years, actually since her passing, they have been providing this scholarship to a female entrepreneur who can attend the summit
Yeah.
in the name of your mom. And I just think that legacy is so beautiful. But I'd love to dig into, Brian, a couple different things. Like, one is, I had somebody on the podcast a couple weeks ago who was focused on this idea of experience capital and how oftentimes motherhood can be a great example of that experience capital, but we don't always think about it that way. And when I hear your mom's story and how she made decisions based on her core values, start first and
Yeah.
foremost was family, it was you and your brother, it was her role as a mom, and then it was all the other stuff driven by her, voracious appetite to learn, by her creativity, right? By all these things. And I found that alignment so very beautiful. And then the other thing that you've been talking about is how this is very niche. The publications and the magazine, they're niche. Talk about that from the standpoint of branding and maybe why other publications aren't doing as well, perhaps maybe because they are not as niche, or just your perspective on this topic.
Well, I think when I look at my mom's passions, so you think about tea, or you think about music, or you think about sewing, or you think about cross stitch. You think about people that, no one is cross stitching out of necessity. They're not
Right.
cross stitching in order to wear something to work that day. They're
Right.
cross stitching because it's something that makes them happy. And it also happens to be something they spend a lot of money on, because once someone has a passion, they pour their disposable income into those things that bring them happiness in return. And I think she realized that when she tapped into audiences that were passionate, that was the number one driver of our business is there a passionate audience for this subject matter? And if the answer was yes, and it was an audience that spends money, then she saw an opportunity to deliver more content to that audience to enrich their experience, to then cause them to buy more things and then continue to turn to her and the brands for that engagement, for that expansion of their own knowledge, and then bringing a community together. So you think about these things in this ecosystem, and she did it beautifully. My whole life, there were collections of teapots and teacups and things in her kitchen. Well, I never understood what that passion was. I thought they were beautiful, but I wasn't wanting to start adding teapots and things to a collection. And then as I've gotten older, I realized she did plant some seeds somewhere in here, because I find myself now engaging in different collections of things, but also different passions of things that I spend my money on. And I get it now. There's a full circle moment that's happened. And I realized, I think 11 years ago is when I started concepting the idea of launching Bake from Scratch. So a brand that is really, now you could say, Brian's passion poured out into a brand.
Right.
And it was my aha moment of how her whole career happened.
Wow.
I finally wasn't working for my mom. I was working alongside my mom as an entrepreneur, as a passionate home baker, and as someone that wanted to take that passion and pour it into a community, because we didn't have a publishing and media community in baking. And that experience has shown me in retrospect how all of this other stuff came to be. Because I worked for her, I learned a lot, I loved being a part of the company, but it wasn't Brian's passions being poured out every day onto magazine paper, cookbook paper, and content distribution until 11 years ago when Bake from Scratch came into existence.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about both Bake from Scratch, but I also want you to tell the story of how you ended up back at the company because we've sort of made this sound seamless and it actually wasn't. So maybe let's start with that question first. This was not seamless for you. You did not graduate from college and immediately join the family business. What happened?
No, and that would have never happened in her playbook, and it was very intentional. So my brother and I both graduated from high school, and we both went to university. Eric stayed at the University of Alabama and got his degree in finance. I did not continue in college after the first year because I realized my first life dream and I became a flight attendant. And travel was my first passion in life. It's the first thing I remember saying, "Do we get to go on an airplane? Ooh, I'm so excited." And mom would always say, "Oh, the vacation's over." And I would say, "Mom, the vacation's not over until we fly home," because that flying was still the vacation for me. And so my first career was in the airline industry, and Eric moved to New York, and she allowed us, or actually encouraged us, to follow our own passions and dreams and have careers. And over my years in the airline industry, I worked my way into the in flight training program. I was teaching new hire flight attendants. I was creating curriculum with the FAA. I was using this creative part of my brain that I did not really know yet was alive. And my brother was doing banking deals on Wall Street and all the New York stuff that made him so happy. And she did that thing she does where she realized we were demonstrating character traits that actually she had both of these in her split brain, but she saw in us the potential to be her business partners. And I'll never forget the day she said, "I want to talk to the both of you. You've got these amazing careers. You're both doing really well. But would you ever, or have you thought about the potential of working with me at Hoffman Media? Would you boys ever be interested in that?" And she said, "This is a low pressure conversation. If you say, 'Mom, no, this is the career I'm in. It's the one I want to stay in.' She said, 'I'm going to cheer you on all the way through because you should be happy. But if by chance you make the decision you want to join me in business, I need to be thinking through the future of the company.' She said, 'I have to start planning for my own retirement or for what the future of the business is. Do I need to hire more executive leadership to assist me in the growth of the company, or is it going to be you?' And that was a big conversation.
And you had never okay, but I'm sort of stunned by this. You had never had this conversation with her
No,
before? This had never
not
come
at
up?
all.
Okay, that seems so strange to me.
So what she said after the fact was the reason it never came up was that she wanted us to have careers where we had succeeded, failed, gotten in trouble, had other people tell us how to be a good employee. She said someone else had to be the one telling you you're late to work, that's unacceptable. This is what you need to do to succeed in your quest for advancement. She said if you always worked for mom, we'd always have the mother-son thing, so we'd fight and get back together and love each other, all that stuff, she said, but if someone else did it, you were gonna learn. And then when she saw in us that we had learned and that we were advancing in careers, she said, "I knew not." It wasn't that she said, "I knew not to let you get too far down those career paths," but she said, "I knew the timing for both of you, ironically, was near the same time, and I wanted you to know that this was an option for you to start considering. In your more mature brains, you could now think about your career, your future, your life, and what you wanted." And she said, "You also were old enough to recognize what I had done." She said, "When you were young, you might know what mom does, but did you appreciate what mom does?" And that was very profound, I think, in that she realized we had maturity and that we were able to then see the business, see her, and see our opportunity if we wanted to take it to join her. And my brother was a pretty quick yes. He loved the thought of being in the business side of the company. He loved the part of the finance and the deal making and all of those things. And I said no at first. I said, "I'm not ready." I said, "You know, my dream was to be in the airline industry. I'm doing really well. I think I need to stay here for a little while. And she said, okay, but if things shift in the company, it's going to be, because I needed to move on. I said, I understand. And I just wasn't there yet. But 6 months later, it was like I woke up one day and I was ready to hang up the wings. I knew that she had offered me something that my creative instinct was ready for. And so I left the airline world and joined the business with her and my brother. And that's been almost 18 years.
I mean, so many elements of that story. It's just amazing. The wisdom and the foresight that she had, and I'm gonna sort of interpret from what you said. If it were me, and I'm the mom of 2 teenagers, so if my kids were launched and I am thinking about how I would approach this, the fact that your mother understood enough about herself that it would maybe have been hard for her to hold you to account if you had jumped right into the company, and that she saw an opportunity for you to learn those valuable management and leadership lessons in other organizations so that you would already come to her with some experience, right?
Yeah.
I think that's so incredibly brilliant. It shows such foresight on her part. That's amazing.
And she later credited things, even like things that are now a part of the company DNA. It's not just her DNA that she left behind. It's our the three of us leaving marks on different aspects of the
Yeah.
company. And like the airline world, it's a super flexible world. I worked nights, I worked weekends, I worked all hours of the day. And while we don't want that to be the daily tone of the company, it actually led to us having what is now a flexible work environment. Because I told her day one, I said, Mom, the hardest part of this for me is the thought of 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, wake up, put on the business clothes. And I said, that's just not my personality. And over time, it wasn't immediate. She did still kind of flex the mom muscles a little bit. But over the years of Eric and I really joining her in business and becoming her counterparts, we both got to influence what we see today in the culture of the company. And we get to wear jeans and shorts to work now. And that was not going on when we started 18 years ago.
I love that. I love that. Okay, let's go back to you were starting to tell me about Bake from Scratch. You are joining me for this conversation from the beautiful island of Capri. I'm just more than a little bit jealous, as I'm sure folks listening will be too. Maybe talk a little bit more about Bake from Scratch, how that fits into the broader company, and what you're actually doing in Capri.
So, like I referenced, talking about launching my own brand within the walls of Hoffman Media was a game changing moment, not only for me, but for the company in a lot of ways too, because this brand was the first brand we ever launched with social media having an account before there was an actual magazine.
Mm.
I opened an account called the Bake Feed. I started putting baking content into the feed from other bakeries, from places I had visited. It was very from the hip. I mean, it was like I just had a croissant at this bakery. And I thought, let's see if there's people out there that take engagement with this baking focused media channel. And they did.
Mm.
And they started following. And then we started teasing, we're working on a magazine. And I went to my mom and my brother and I said, I think I want to start a magazine called Bake from Scratch. And my mom said, well, I think maybe baking, there's a foot there, but all from scratch? And I said, yeah, mom. I said, I like to bake everything from start to finish with ingredients that have an outcome. I don't buy any box mixes and I don't buy, things that shortcut along the way.
Mhm.
And I said, I think there's an audience out there. I'm finding them online. We're seeing it socially first. And she was a little skeptical, and she said, "I'm not sure, but I'm gonna give you a chance." She said, "Every entrepreneur deserves a chance to succeed or fail." And she said, "I'm willing to let you do one issue of the magazine. Let's put it on the newsstand, and we'll let the newsstand tell us. We'll let the audience that buys magazines dictate to you whether this was a success. We're not gonna pour marketing money behind it. We're not gonna invest so deep that we can't get out from under what we do." And that's been the DNA of our company from the beginning, is a very slow approach to testing markets. And so she said, you can test the brand. So Brooke Bell and I, my colleague that I've also worked with for 18 years, we're driving down the road to New Orleans, and I have a notepad in the car with me. And I said, okay, Brooke, what would we want to put in the magazine? What do people want to read about? Because we knew that it had to be more than recipes. The world didn't need just another collection of recipes. For me, it was about the stories, the people, the places, the flavors, the travel. So again, going back to the first passion of my life, and we made this list of things. And so we let that be a little bit of the guiding structure to the very first issue of the magazine. So we published the first issue. I flew to Kentucky to the printing company where they produced the magazine. I was there for the first one to come off the press. I'll never forget it as long as I'm alive. And I remember thinking, oh, the stakes are high because mom's going to say no or yes based on this.
Right.
Did we do it? Did we nail it? And the magazine came out in the autumn of 2015. And within 3 weeks, maybe a month, the newsstand consultants were calling and they said, you better be working on the second issue because this magazine is selling like crazy.
That's amazing.
And I just beamed with a huge smile. And I walked in my mom's office and I said, this is not a told you so dance, but it is a dance of celebration. And we have to do the second issue. And so she said, well, you're proving to yourself that there's a market like you said there was. Go for it. So we continued publishing. And in 2016, there's an award ceremony for the top launches of the year. So the magazine industry recognizes the new magazines that are succeeding and growing, and they pass their test phase to become actual magazines. And that year, Bake from Scratch, along with two other Hoffman Media magazines, were recognized in the top 30. So we were 10% of this list were magazines from our family's business. And Bake from Scratch took home the hottest launch of the year award.
Amazing.
So it not only became a magazine, but it became a award-winning magazine in the first year.
That's amazing, Brian. That's amazing.
And from there, the journey just has gone on in a way that I say, again, my mom used the same words I use, is we're kicking out the walls. So over the last 10 years, Bake from Scratch has a podcast, cookbooks, e-learning classes that started because of the pandemic. I teach live events in Birmingham in our test kitchen. And I also get to travel with people around the world because I decided, well, I didn't decide. People were actually sending me letters going, you used to be a flight attendant. Now you're doing all these magazine issues about France and Italy and England. Why are you not taking us there? And I was like, oh my God, if I get to travel and do the baking work, this is going to be really good. So 6 years ago, I tested a baking retreat and put it out into the audience. Does anyone want to come along with me and learn, and we'll travel together? And for 6 years, we've sold out most of our baking retreats. I'm now doing 14 to 16 per year. 8 or so are abroad. And I'm in Italy right now along the Amalfi Coast and on the island of Capri with a group of bakers. And we're eating pasta, pizza, and cake and drinking good wine and having a blast.
That is amazing. I don't even like to bake, and I'm ready to sign up.
See, anybody can bake, especially if there's travel involved, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. That is just, it's such an amazing story. I have loved learning about your mom. I read your book, actually, that you published, what, last year or the year
Yeah.
before, in the last couple of years.
Yeah, last year.
And it really gave me such insight into her and how incredibly thoughtful and wise she was, how family, as we've talked about, and motherhood was really the center of her universe, but also giving back to all of these people, whether it's
Yeah.
women at the Southern Sea, as you and I've talked about, or in her community,
Yeah.
and well beyond that, as she's built this incredible network of amazing people. So it's very, very inspiring. I'd love it, Brian, knowing that I have to let you go because you do have to get to your very important teaching gig in Capri. But maybe a few sort of final words of advice, like what you think your mom If she were sitting here with us today, which I kind of feel like she is, what advice would she
Yes.
give to aspiring female entrepreneurs? Maybe someone like her who's raising children and thinking about starting a company. What would she tell them?
I think about our time that my mom and I shared on the stage at the Southern Sea Summit, and just the sound bites alone from that day that still play in my head, because it might be the first time in I can't remember how many years that I got to stand next to her and listen to her words to an audience of predominantly female entrepreneurs, her people,
Mm.
and to be there. I say I facilitated or interviewed her in order to get her story, for this amazing group of people to hear. And when she looked into the audience and she told people that family was first, she assured them that they were valuable. She always wanted people to hear that they were valuable, and that even if their bumpy ride brought them successes or failures, that they were going to be okay.
Mm.
And I remember her constantly saying to people, it's not all success. If that was the journey, everybody would be an entrepreneur. Everybody would own a business. But it was perseverance, passion, and being willing to accept failure not as demise of yourself, but also as the inspiration for how you put yourself back together or shift gears and continue going. Because she always said, keep going. The lights are not turning off. It's just the path is shifting. So you've got to turn your head to see the light in a different direction. And she always told me that she said, you can do tough things. We can do tough things. And that applies to business. That applies to everything in life. And after she passed away, I heard her words telling me, you can do this tough thing. You are going to continue to succeed. You're going to carry forward. Even though the pain and misery of her not being here, she is the light inside of me. She is the guide. And her words play in my mind on repeat. And I can still hear that presentation at the Southern Sea telling the audience, you have worth. And I think if there was anything in the world that she wanted people to know, was that they have worth.
Beautifully said. Brian, I am truly grateful. I have truly loved this conversation. Her story is so inspiring, and to see her story continue through you is really a beautiful thing. And we, as members of the Southern Sea, get to continue to benefit from it. And my listeners here at She Said podcast do as well. So I'm really, really grateful. Thank you so much.
You. I think on behalf of my brother and myself and everyone at Hoffman Media, the opportunity to share her story, to continue that legacy of inspiration for her is something that I'll never dim or grow tired of. And it just means a lot that you gave me this opportunity to celebrate her further.
I loved it. Friend, thanks so much for joining me for this incredible conversation. Brian's story, and especially the story of his mother, Phyllis Hoffman DiPiano, reminds us that some of the most enduring business legacies are rooted in love and resilience and in a fierce commitment to put family first. As we celebrate this She Said podcast, the Southern Sea collaboration, I hope you feel inspired by the idea that entrepreneurship doesn't require us to choose between motherhood and ambition. In fact, as Phyllis's legacy so beautifully shows, motherhood can be our greatest experience capital, a source of wisdom, strength, and innovative spirit. Whether you're a business, guiding a family, or maybe searching for your own version of success, remember, in Brian's words and in the words of his mother, you are valuable, you can do tough things, and your unique story can inspire others in ways that you may never expect. Friend, if this episode moved you, I'd be so grateful if you would share it with a friend, if you would subscribe or follow this podcast, and join our community of incredible trailblazers who are redefining what it means to lead and to succeed. Until next time, I'm Laura Cox Kaplan, and remember, She Said podcast is a weekly production of She Said Media. Take care.